Okay, welcome everyone. We mostly have our virtual audience, which is really cool. There might be some individuals coming into the library as well, but I'm going to kick it off. So today we're going to be talking about, getting started in social impact. The difference between incorporation, so that's filing for your own incorporation in your own business entity versus being fiscally sponsored. I'll do a short presentation and then I'm really excited. We have two fiscal sponsors or two executive directors of different fiscal sponsors here with us today to talk a little bit about their work and their organizations. My name is Rosalind Zavris, and I am the entrepreneur in residence at the public library. So I really like this quote from Social Impact Commons. They support a lot of fiscal sponsors in the US, and it's always talking about sharing resources. And through sharing resources, social impact work can become more equitable, diverse, sustainable, and impactful. And although the fiscal sponsorship model isn't well known, the idea these days of a sharing economy is becoming even more well known. So there are many resources out there in the world, and finding ways that we can share and collaborate, especially within social impact, is very powerful. And so as I said, my name is Rosalind Zavris. I was selected as the entrepreneur in residence, so I'm here at the public library twice a week to offer office hours to anybody that needs support in setting up a nonprofit or working with their nonprofit. I'm also available virtually, and I will be giving sessions about twice a month regarding a variety of topics in nonprofit management. So what we'll be covering today, as I mentioned, what is fiscal sponsorship? Some comparisons between incorporating and sponsorship, and then our lovely panel. So what is fiscal sponsorship? That's a great question, and one that I think all of us, myself and the panelists included, get asked as soon as we mention it. And a good way of describing it is a common nonprofit management structure and infrastructure. Another way that I like to say it is a nonprofit that's already established is lending its fiscal tax exempt status and fiscal structure to other social groups that are trying to achieve a project and create impact. And it's been shown as a very effective way to seed new nonprofits, start social movements, and really deliver social services in a quick and effective way to the community. Setting up your own nonprofit can be a big challenge. And when you have another nonprofit who's well established that already has a corporate structure and a financial backbone, a fiscal sponsor can give you that solid operational foundation to begin with so that you can deliver your programs right out of the gate. And so, the question is, okay, this sounds great. So what do fiscal sponsors provide? They provide, as I mentioned, a staff and board. So that means, say you're a solo individual that is looking to make an impact within your community. You don't necessarily have a board, right? That's one thing you need when you're starting a new nonprofit. You maybe don't have an accountant or a bookkeeper. Fiscal sponsors have that staff and structure in place so that you can do your work without worrying about the back office. They also have systems in place already. So bookkeeping systems, documentation, policies. Different fiscal sponsors have different levels of these systems, but there are these aspects in place so that, again, you don't have to write, an expense policy from scratch. They also often provide insurance and corporate support, which are, again, compliance issues that you really need to think through. And specifically around compliance, a lot of nonprofits, once they reach a certain size, will need to be audited and have a variety of other regulatory concerns. A fiscal sponsor can be there to support you through that process, or even depending on the sponsor, can help, will manage the process completely. So then the question is, who do fiscal sponsors support? As I mentioned, individual change makers, someone within a particular community that sees a need and wants to move, create a project or create impact. Maybe you're a collective or a group of collaborators. You have an idea, or you've been doing volunteer work inside your community, but without an official structure. Fiscal sponsors can help create that structure for you so that you can also receive donations and gather further support. Some for-profit businesses, especially ones that have, a nonprofit arm or maybe a social good aspect to it, instead of necessarily becoming a B corporation, because that's not the whole business model. A fiscal sponsor can help support, these singular projects, especially. And fiscal sponsors can actually support established nonprofits. If you're a nonprofit and you've been really struggling with some back office support and, it's becoming really inefficient, plenty of fiscal sponsors will bring into the fold nonprofits that already exist to, again, share those resources and support each other. So as I mentioned, there is a more traditional approach to setting up a nonprofit organization. And in the state of Connecticut, there are a variety of steps. And in order to register for a nonprofit status, you have to register first at your state level and then federally. So you create your idea. You have a great idea for a social project, something that's going to have some sort of societal benefit. Well, you gather your team. You create a name and create an overall business plan. Oftentimes, this is in the form of maybe doing a couple of volunteer projects in the neighborhood, or really seeing if there is a need within your community. You then need to register as a state corporation. As I mentioned, in the state of Connecticut, you have to submit your articles of incorporation. You need to ensure that you have 3 board members that are part of this submission. And there are a variety of other legal steps to go through. Once you do that, you can set up your system, such as getting a bank account, and you can start to operate as a corporation in the state of Connecticut, but not yet as a nonprofit. And that's really important, because you need to then take all that information and file for 501c3 tax exempt status in the federal government. This step can take time. They say right now, I think that it is at least 60 days, and it could be longer. If there's any questions or review the IRS has, that will delay this process even further. And then once you achieve 501c3 status, then you can begin fundraising. You can't begin fundraising before that moment. So you have this project, you have this idea, you're excited to get it started in the community, but you cannot receive any tax exempt donations until you have your status. So then once you're fundraising and you have these funds, really you can begin to deliver your programs. So this is a very long process, and there are numerous places where it can be delayed. There's a lot of paperwork, and at the end is when you can finally start working in your community and receiving donations. If you were to work with a fiscal sponsor instead, the beginning is very similar. You have that idea for this social project, for this social benefit that you want to work towards. You gather your team, you still need to create a sort of business plan to understand who is the community that you're serving, what are you working to do, and then creating that overall plan and structure. You then can apply for fiscal sponsorship. So applying for fiscal sponsorship will depend per fiscal sponsor. So each, and our panelists can talk about what their processes are, but each fiscal sponsor is a little different. Potentially they could require an application and a wait period. Some of them are a little quicker and more immediate, but it's definitely, I've not seen it be as long as it takes to get tax exempt status with the IRS. And then you deliver your programs. right? And that is the exciting part, that once you have been reviewed by a fiscal sponsor, and then you are there and able to start fundraising, delivering your programs, working together. And what I like especially about the fiscal sponsor model is that you are receiving, as a part of that, shared management, legal, HR, accounting, insurance, fundraising, and operational support. Once you have, received your sponsorship, and you're a part now of a community and a collective that are working in similar programmatic areas as you. So just as a quick recap, regardless of which approach you take, whether it's the official incorporation approach or the fiscal sponsorship route, you still need to think about, what is your theory of change? Your theory of change is, what is the impact that you are trying to make in the vision of the world that your organization will see when all of your work is complete, your overall business plan. You need your leadership and your director's team. You do need to be thinking about overall sustainability. How are you going to raise funds? How are you going to charge for any of your services, things like that, and compliance. As I mentioned, a fiscal sponsor would be there to support you on your compliance journey, but it is something that everyone needs to think about, such as, making sure that there's separation of duties between the person signing the check and the person working with the vendors. Things like that are all part of pieces that you will need in your organization. There's some really good conversation going on in the chat. And so we can also talk about any of these questions that are coming up in the panel as well. I want to get through these slides and then delve into it. So this is the size of the nonprofit sector in the United States. It is almost 1.5 million or charitable organizations. That is 1.5 million organizations that are registered with 501c3 status. That does not count community groups. That does not count, fiscally sponsored orgs. That is just individuals with official tax exempt status. And 88% of those almost 1.5 million organizations are below $500,000 in revenue. So there are a lot of really small nonprofits in the US that are doing great work. Oftentimes they're working directly in their local community, doing initiatives and programs that are very specific, but don't generate, large amounts of revenue. And, just to put that into perspective, 995,000 have less than 50K in annual revenue. Again, that's usually because these are small programs that are, working in a small context. And so, 22% of those organizations, of the 1.5 million, their executive directors, their senior staff are not compensated. And that means they're volunteers. And volunteers are wonderful. They're doing great work, but that is also really challenging when this is maybe a side project or something that you're doing on weekends, but then you have this whole administrative hurdle to get through with running an organization. And within Connecticut, there are 22,000 nonprofits. So there's a large number of organizations doing great work in Connecticut and trying to think, how can we, especially if they're smaller, share resources so that the work that we're doing goes even further. And so when we're thinking about fiscal sponsorship, a lot of people say, well, fiscal sponsorship, that's new. I've never heard of it before. Actually, in 1959 was the first time an organization was fiscally sponsored. So it's not that new. In 1993, the fiscal sponsorship, 6 Ways to Do It Right, was written. And this was written by a lawyer, Gregory Colvin, and he outlined the different models of fiscal sponsorship that he had seen and that have been successful. So, again, not a new concept and has been given a lot of thought. The IRS finally recommended fiscal sponsorship in 2012 as an alternative to the standalone 501c3 structure. So at first, in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't especially clear, is this a good thing or a bad thing, according to the IRS? But in 2012, they came out with an advisory opinion saying, actually, fiscal sponsorship is a really good idea, especially for smaller organizations. From a simple search in Connecticut alone, there are over 10 organizations that serve as fiscal sponsors. That doesn't mean there's only 10. It's that there are 10 organizations that advertise fiscal sponsorship in the state of Connecticut. These are also really great opportunities for arts organizations or arts projects to receive additional support and be able to apply for grants. And as a part of a fiscal sponsorship, one of the questions is, well, how do they pay for what they do? They'll normally charge a fee. The average in Connecticut, it looks like it goes between 7 and 10% for their services. And most organizations, I've read some research that if you're lower than $2 million in revenue, you're spending upwards of 35% of your annual budget on administrative support. And so fiscal sponsorship allows you to spend much, much less on your overall administrative support, only 7 to 10%, and gain access to shared resources so that you, again, more of your revenue that you're earning is going to the work that you want to do. And so with everything, there's pros and cons, right? Fiscal sponsorship isn't going to be for everybody. There are some instances where it will be more beneficial than others. You know, as we discussed, the cost aspect, you have fixed, you know what your costs are, they're fixed. And instead of worrying about large administrative overhead, you know exactly what they're going to look like. There's greater access to human capital and support, such as, you know, bookkeepers, lawyers, technical team. You have opportunities for collaboration. It's really great when you're in a fiscally sponsored community, because then you can work with maybe other projects in your community of fiscally sponsored orgs and figure out what's working for you, lessons learned, just a collective brain trust. You can also easily manage starting up, restructuring, and winding down. Fiscal sponsorship is especially great if you have a discrete project and you know maybe it'll only last for 1 to 2 years. Then the process of starting something up and winding it down is much easier than needing to go through the whole process of applying for incorporation and then dissolving that company. Some potential cons, again, these might not be cons to you, but you will be managed directly by another organization. You don't have your own employer identification number, right? You are borrowing one from another org. So that means that they are very, in a traditional fiscal sponsor model, they will directly manage or more directly manage, how you're running your finances, how you're running your organization. Some funders are still learning about fiscal sponsorship. And so there might be some confusion about a fiscally sponsored org and whether or not how those donations work. So, it's not necessarily that funders are wary of fiscal sponsors, they just might not know. So that's something to keep in mind, that it's an education opportunity for your funders as well. And because you are borrowing the tax exempt status or, leaning on the tax exempt status of another organization, they have their own corporate structure, their own management structure. And that is just something you need to be aware of as an organization. But there are, as I mentioned, in Connecticut alone, 10 organizations that fiscally sponsor. You can look at the different fiscal sponsors and say, okay, this one is more aligned with the work that I'm trying to do. And so with that, that is all I'm going to say on the matter. I really want to turn it over to our panelists. First, I want to introduce Amanda LaFleur. She's a well-renowned entrepreneur, designer. She's led numerous successful nonprofits and now is the executive director of NOPI. So we're really excited to have her today. And then Jerome Su, he's also an artist, organizer. He is the executive director of a fiscal sponsor called Prime Produce, and it's really a community and nonprofit incubator located in New York City. So with that, I am going to stop sharing and say welcome to our panelists.
Hello, wonderful to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having me as well.
Awesome. So if you both could introduce yourselves, I will go Amanda and then Jerome.
Sounds good. Well, it's nice to meet you, Jerome, as well. We didn't have a chance to chat before. And Roz, thank you so much for having me. My name is Amanda LaFleur, and I am the executive director of NOPI, and we are a nonprofit incubator located just outside of Boston, and we provide services across the United States.
Wonderful. Jerome.
And hi, my name is Jerome. As Roz mentioned, I help to support a grassroots nonprofit incubator called Prime Produce Limited, based here in New York City. Wonderful to meet you, Amanda, and thanks, Roz, for having us. Yeah, and we basically, I would say in short, we kind of fell into fiscal sponsorship. Our program kind of started off as a kind of a way for friends, family, and neighbors to collaborate on social good projects. And pretty soon we realized that actually the nuts and bolts of what that means is essentially fiscal sponsorship. And so that's become more formalized over the years. But yeah, really delighted to share more about it.
And so that led into perfectly my first question, which is, why did you become a fiscal sponsor? What brought you into this work? So Amanda.
Yeah, I'm just piggybacking off of what Jerome just said. I feel like that's such a common story that, organizations kind of fall into fiscal sponsorship. When we started back in 2017, it was something I personally had a vision of doing, but our board was much more hesitant at the time. And then when the pandemic hit, just as Jerome said, one of our first projects that were coming through our incubator needed a fiscal sponsor, and we were happy to jump in and help their project that was limited in time and scope. And then it just grew from there. And personally, I found fiscal sponsorship very rewarding. Did I just cut out?
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay. I got the little connecting to audio thing. But yeah, I find it personally rewarding. I think, like Jerome said, it's like fiscal sponsorship and incubation just go hand in hand, just naturally go hand in hand.
Wonderful. And so, as you're thinking about the organizations that you've worked with over the past few years, what would you say is a good fit for fiscal sponsorship? And the inverse of that question, right? Who might not be the best fit?
Is that for me or for Jerome?
I'll go Jerome and then.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. All right. So who's a good fit? Who's not a good fit? Okay. So I have some strong opinions about this actually. So in that slide that Roz shared, there's a lot of nonprofits, right? And so kind of like from a high level view, I would say, and this is a hot take, so take it with a grain of salt. But if there's already an organization that is doing something similar, maybe you don't need to do the same thing separately and have both teams eating the administrative overhead costs, and maybe you can team up. Now, understandably, it may make sense to do your own thing. There's many different cancer research, organizations, for example. But I think a lot of times there's a very good argument for joining forces with someone who's already doing something similar. So that's kind of one general observation about the sector, and why I think fiscal sponsorship is really great, because it can really help us find greater efficiency as a sector through sharing resources and deploying them kind of in a more cost-effective way, where we're getting an economy of scale. So that's kind of one thing. The other thing I'd say is, honestly, I think that there's a lot of folks that have this idea that having their own organization is, and having it be a standalone entity is very important for realizing their vision. But often I'll kind of nudge a little bit and just, like, what does it actually look like in practice? Because most people are thinking about running their own organization and having agency to focus on their programs, whatever that is, and not being tied to a boatload of, compliance, administrative stuff, which, really until you become a pretty sizable organization where you have a whole staff to handle that stuff, that's going to ultimately fall on the founder, the executive director. And so I think that folks that maybe don't have a deep love for organizational, management and compliance, which I think is a lot of people, and I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it myself at this point. And but I'd say that if you're someone that really just wants to focus on your program and is not interested in building an entire corporate infrastructure, that's another great reason to look at fiscal sponsorship. And I've been talking for a while, so I'll stop there.
Yeah. And if I may, I just want to add on to that because you really hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of people, so our organization, we have 30 programs that we're currently fiscally sponsoring, and they span all across the nonprofit life cycle. And I feel like we get startups that are wanting to accelerate the speed in which they're able to deliver services and get things going, and they just don't have the resources already for that back office administrative support. And then we also work with organizations that went through the whole process. They got incorporated in their state, they got their 501c3 designation, but then it was kind of like a cold hard truth when the time came and they realized, managing a nonprofit is very different than, it takes away from doing the work of the mission. It is a whole job unto itself. And one thing I found interesting, I do want to disagree on one point, because even in my own presentations, I put don't start a nonprofit, like seek out other organizations that are already doing the work you're doing and see if you can lend your talents there. I think that's a really good, kind of raises 2 points. One, I feel like, we do need a lot of diversity, even in areas that already maybe have a lot of organizations working. I had a meeting the other day with a foundation that looks at different cities like New York or Boston that already have organizations there trying to solve problems, but yet the problem still exists. So they go out and looking in other areas to see what's working in another area. How can we bring that here? So I think, definitely don't discount right away, like, oh, this big organization's already doing what I'm doing, but they still might not be filling like a niche need in the community. So that might be one reason to still consider starting your own organization. But I think also, secondly, it creates employment opportunities. You have entrepreneurs that maybe, they want to be self-employed, or they don't have the experience to go get hired with an existing nonprofit. So by creating that role for themselves within their own organization, that could do a future path that maybe didn't exist before that. But I think if you're somebody who is just truly like, I want to volunteer my time and do this thing, then yes, it might be better suited to volunteer with an existing organization. But if you're getting started from the beginning, we always tell our projects, start your budget with how you're going to pay yourself. Because if you're not there to run, if you're not getting paid to run your organization, you're eventually going to have to leave and no one's going to be there to take it over.
Such great advice. I think a lot of people forget about themselves, which is, they're wonderful individuals working in this space, trying to do good work, but we all, need to thrive and do more than survive. So yes, 100%. And so, what are, kind of continuing on this topic, what are things that you've seen from the organizations that you've fiscally sponsored and some lessons learned, that you like to give, especially your new organizations that are coming on board? Amanda.
I'll ask for forgiveness in advance. My children are yelling and screaming down the hall, if you can hear them. I feel like I get to say that a lot in Zoom meetings. Pardon my kids. So I think some of the best, or the advice I like to give is just, kind of the thing I just said, like, think about if your future in this organization. Are you here for the long haul, or are you just wanting to get off the ground? I like to address founder syndrome, which, if someone's not familiar with that, it's kind of, when you create an organization, you're putting your whole heart and passion into it. But we often forget that nonprofits do not belong to us, the founders, that one day they have to live on without us. And one day we do have to pass that on. It might be sooner than we want to, it might be later than we planned. But it's always good to keep in mind, like, a goal of when I reach X, this is when I know it's time to leave, and be at peace with that you will one day leave the organization, and it hopefully will go on without you.
And Jerome, did you have any lessons learned that you wanted to highlight as well?
One thing that I think also connects to the last question a little bit is, I often, when I field folks that are interested in fiscal sponsorship or curious about it, I'll offer that I think fiscal sponsorship can be really a deeply strategic decision for an organization. So a lot of folks have an idea of running their own organization, and they're like, oh, I don't want to join some other team. I want to have my own ship, but I really think that it's a process. So maybe you can join for fiscal sponsorship for a while, take advantage of all the resources, and then, graduate to your own entity later. Or you may discover that you like it wherever you are. But, just to give one anecdote, there's a great project based out of Brooklyn, New York, called the New Cinema Club, and the gentleman came and asked me about fiscal sponsorship with Prime Produce. We have a very particular type of very scrappy grassroots fiscal sponsorship that, frankly, I don't recommend to everybody. I think that really we're well suited only for people that really care about our community and are interested in actually engaging our specific community, or people that have very experimental projects where it'd be hard for them to find another fiscal sponsor. So those, I think, are kind of like where we kind of have fallen into specialize. And really, there's so many different organizations out there, even organizations that aren't providing fiscal sponsorship as a listed service. There's a lot of programs that can still be your fiscal sponsor. And so a nudgist guide to basically look around and see what else is there, because I actually knew about the one organization based in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Municipal Arts Society, or maybe not a society, but like a municipal arts, organization. And we went over there and ended up being a fiscally sponsored program there, which was just way more strategic. Like, we are not local to where his primary clientele is, or his, his stakeholders. They were very well connected and could help with him get the venue and, stuff local and, just the credibility of having a municipal arts council, that's what it was, on board with a cinema screening club was just a much better fit. And so I think it could be really strategic as well, and could be really great. I think there's well, I'll stop there. But yeah, I think that, fiscal sponsorship is only one step, and I think it could be a really great step for any program vision that has a long-term, plan.
And there are a couple of really great points that I want to pull out there. One is fiscal sponsorship doesn't have to be a forever strategy, right? You can apply for 501c3 status and apply for fiscal sponsorship and see, do I like to be fiscally sponsored, or do I want to go out on my own? So that's just something to highlight, that it can be a short-term solution if you would like it to be. The other thing to really point out is, fiscal sponsors do have their own mission and vision. So, if there's a fiscal sponsor and maybe they're not completely in line with what you want to be doing, it's okay to look for another one. And hopefully, as Jerome highlights, most fiscal sponsors I've worked with have been also very candid in saying, these are the types of programs that we support. But here are maybe other organizations that you could go to. So there's a question in the Q&A that I'd like to highlight, and maybe give it to, there's two questions, so I'll give one to each of you. So the first question is, can you find more than one fiscal sponsor for any project? So Amanda.
Thank you so much for that question. Our answer is no. So we are exclusive when we are a fiscal sponsor. And I can't say that I've heard of or seen an organization or project that has had two simultaneously for the same activity. But I could see a situation where you have an incorporated entity and maybe one of their programs is sponsored by one fiscal sponsor and another goes with another organization in that way. But when you're a direct program of your fiscal sponsor, which means you're not a separate entity, then you could not have an additional fiscal sponsor. So that's definitely something to think about when you're considering, should we incorporate or should we just join our fiscal sponsor under their organizational umbrella?
Mhm. And then Jerome, if you get fiscal sponsorship for a project, how does the pay structure work? And how is this divided? How is everything divided between the project, the sponsor, the organization itself?
So it's a great question. Thanks, Lauren. The world of fiscal sponsorship has a lot of different structures. And so you'll see fiscal sponsors that will take anywhere from generally 5% up to 50% of the program's revenue to cover risk, all the administrative costs, all that stuff. Something that I would say is, even a high number like 50% feels like a lot, right? Like what, I gotta, share half of whatever we, raise in donations with the fiscal sponsor. Usually though, those sponsors are a lot more involved. So actually, I always tell, potential sponsorees to really look at those fiscal sponsors, because a lot of times they're doing a lot of that donor introduction. They have the incentive, they're heavily incentivized to support your fundraising. And that's why it's so much more. One thing also I'll kind of share, this kind of touches your first question also, is, what fiscal sponsorship is really about, like under the hood, right, is it's about tax compliance, right? So the IRS, they decide who is eligible to receive tax deductible donations. So what this is really about is like how money is flowing. That's what this whole thing is predicated on. And so if you want to receive tax deductible donations for whatever program it is, like you either have your own 501c3 organization or you go through somebody else's. So to your question, like, is it possible to have two fiscal sponsors? I think, yeah, it's possible. It really depends on how you've structured your programming. So just to give you an example, you might find a fiscal sponsor for a specific event series. That might be something that you do. And so from the IRS's perspective, or from just like the flow of money perspective, like all of the money that is being raised through this event series is going through this fiscal sponsor back to your program. And because it's going through that fiscal sponsor, which has that tax deduction, then that's all kosher, basically. And then you might have another program, that is through some other fiscal sponsor. Say it's not an event series, say it's some online curriculum or something like that. So, it could work. I think the most important thing, though, is that, everybody's aware of what's going on. And then that, the mission is adhering to whatever the 501c3 organizations, either of them, both fiscal sponsors, that they're within compliance themselves with the way that your program is structured. Now, that all being said, to Amanda's point, most fiscal sponsors don't want you doing fiscal sponsorship elsewhere if you're running one program. That just doesn't really make any sense. So yeah, anyhow.
Yeah, I agree with that. So like we don't sponsor performance artists, but we do like art exhibitions. So like we wouldn't be a good fit maybe for one of your programs, but Prime Produce would be a good fit. So then we would probably refer that program out. But then maybe you're a great fit for another, one of our focus areas. Yeah, I wanted to add as well with fiscal sponsorship. So I was very surprised to hear the 50%, but that's interesting to know because I did not know that some sponsors went that high. I do think it's good to quote unquote kind of shop around for a fiscal sponsor, because some fiscal sponsors, like if you Google, there's some that come right to the top of Google. They purely do just exist to give you their 501c3 designation and help you fundraise. and they might have a high upfront cost. They might have a high fee or percentage on what you bring in. They might have a fundraising minimum. So it's definitely good to shop around and kind of think about, what can you ideally commit to? So some organizations like ours, or maybe Prime Produce, I don't know, we don't have a fundraising minimum, but we do have other specific fees that need to be met to offset our cost as your technical assistance provider, your back office. But yes, you want to think about that. And then you also want to think about, how involved do I want my fiscal sponsor to be in our project, in our organization? Us as a fiscal sponsor, we give a ton of autonomy, but you might want more involvement from your sponsor to help with introduction to donors, for grant makers, etc.
Yeah, and I'd love to keep going on that thread. So let's talk a little bit about services. Both the services, that you provide, and then maybe what are even more services. So what are some of the things that a fiscally sponsored organization at NOPE will be receiving as a part of the sponsorship?
Yeah, so at our organization, we are an incubator, but unlike some other incubators where you go through a program and then you graduate, we don't really have a graduation. It's whenever you feel that you're ready to either end your program or go out on your own, you can stay with our incubator indefinitely. But our services that we include is all the accounting and bookkeeping. We do HR and payroll. We also provide, we extend our donated services, discounted services that we have available and are sharing with all of our sponsored programs to lower those costs. You also get the 501c3 designation. We also extend our professional and general liability coverage. Trying to think else. Oh, we do technical assistance as well. So we're kind of support generalists on our team. So we try to help as much as we can, from anything from building a website to, signposting, to consultants or someone that can help with your fundraising plan. So we offer quite a bit with ours, which is why we set our rate at 10%. But yeah, it just varies. Again, you might not want to give 10% and you might not need that much. It just varies.
Mm-hmm. And what about at Prime Produce?
So as I mentioned, we're kind of a scrappy, very lean, grassroots sort of incubator. Really this is what I tell everyone, because basically I only want people that really want a fiscal sponsorship with us, because there's so many great fiscal sponsors out there. I think that our what we offer is very particular. So as Amanda mentioned, there's kind of like the non-negotiables. So, because as a fiscal sponsor, we are legally liable for all of the programs that are in our portfolio. We support and also kind of try to provide some level of guidance and structure around accounting and insurance and compliance, which includes some legal stuff from time to time. But then, as far as other services, I'd say that we're very unstructured. So, I often will characterize what we have as an ecosystem, where it's like a network or a community of mutual aid. And so people that join our fiscal sponsorship program, they kind of get what they put into it based on who they engage within our community. And so some people get a lot of creative services, some people are getting some legal help. It's kind of like whatever, wherever they end up self-directing themselves. Oh, and then in terms of our fee structure, so, we're kind of bottom of the barrel in terms of fee. We take 5%, and then we also have a practice of basically waiving that for programs that have an annual revenue of under $40,000. Now, that being said, a lot of programs, even if they don't have to pay, they'll still tip towards kind of like the central operating costs, because they understand that, we're doing work, and, that's kind of our vibe, which is it's about a shared resource and community trying to support the platform. Yeah.
And I really want to emphasize that, it is a range within these fee structures. And as you can kind of hear, that the fee oftentimes corresponds to the sorts of services you're going to get from your sponsor. And there are some sponsors that are there to really support your fundraising. If you have a great idea, but you have no idea how to fundraise for it, you don't know what it's like to build a major giving campaign, you've never really applied for a grant before, you'll want to go to a fiscal sponsor that has that deep fundraising support to really get you off the ground and build your fundraising platform successfully. And so that might mean a slightly higher fiscal sponsor fee, but the services and the support that you'll get is more in line with the things that you need. And so, you know, as Amanda mentioned before, shop around, think about what it is you need, and what the fiscal sponsor can provide. Another thing that I want to talk a little bit about is that community and that ecosystem, because not only what I really like about fiscal sponsorship is not only do you have a relationship with your fiscal sponsor, but you oftentimes have relationships with the other nonprofits that are sponsored by your sponsor, right? You end up as kind of a sibling relationship. Can Amanda, can you talk a little bit about, you know, the ecosystem at NOPI and ways that NOPI projects have been able to support each other?
Yeah, so our ecosystem is a little challenging, I will say, at times from the aspect of we are a virtual organization. We do have an office location outside, you know, here in Boston, but we support programs across the United States. So, you know, we often don't get to meet in person. So what we try to do is leverage technologies, you know, like we use Slack, we try to get everybody in there, but not everyone uses Slack. So then some are communicating by email, some are communicating by Slack. So us here at NOPI, we really try to connect programs together through like an introduction or a Zoom meeting, just to get them collaborating if they have similar or aligned missions. But yeah, it's a bit of a challenge because not everyone's coming to the same place, or we can't like get together, you know, in person. But we try. Good faith attempt.
Well, and at least you at NOPI know, oh, there are two organizations working on something very similar in this space, you know, and you're able to connect them with each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, and just dovetailing on that, it's like when we sometimes do get organizations that are doing similar work, and, you know, we respect, you know, hey, you both want to do this thing, you know, do it. You can collaborate or you cannot. So we don't have like, you know, it's not exclusive, like one person per cause.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll share on the same question there. So I definitely agree that for projects that are more remote, so we do have some fiscally sponsored programs have fiscally sponsored programs that, you know, are, you know, very virtual, where it is, you know, more of a, you know, corporate infrastructure situation, and they're less engaged directly in our community. And I think that really is a challenging hurdle to get past in terms of like getting that kind of organic, relational, personal connection. As far as programming that happens in person, we also are very fortunate that we have a community center where a lot of our programming has been based out of. So I guess I'll just maybe share one anecdote that's kind of neat. We had a mentee that was first introduced to our ecosystem through one of our amazing programs called Emergent Works, which teaches technology to formerly incarcerated and systems impacted communities. And so he came in as a mentee to learn some technology skills. By the time he kind of graduated from that mentorship, we actually needed help with one of our websites. We have this other program in our portfolio called Pre Pro Bono, which supports underrepresented pre-law students to help them, you know, jumpstart their career in public interest law or social justice. And we needed a website redesign. And so he jumped in to help out. He was looking for things to volunteer at, and because he was around the community center, you know, he knew about this other program. So he jumped in there to help out with that project. And as a result of being around a little bit, you know, he was poking around the community center. He caught wind that, oh, hey, there's this cool thing going up on the roof, or going on upstairs on the roof, and we have this roof garden. And so we have this really cool program called Seeds to Soil that operates the roof garden on our community center. And they do basically urban ecology. And so he jumped in as a Seeds to Soil fellow, like 3 summers later, to help, you know, like grow. I mean, he's originally from the Gambia, so he was trying to reconnect to his African roots with some growing practices and experimenting up there. And that was really great to have some plants surviving up there, because we really needed someone to help out. And then after that, he ended up joining another one of a fourth program in our ecosystem called Grow Externships, which supports underrepresented students and developing professionals that are trying to build their careers in environmental science or sustainability. And so he ended up joining that program, flew with us to Hawaii to run an externship there, and now lives in Hawaii, where he's doing a bunch of other cool stuff now. So that's, I mean, and that's quite unusual that someone touches so many of our programs. But it's one of the things that I really have treasured is that people can kind of fall into this place and get a lot of different types of support and learn a lot of different things and build a lot of relationships.
I love that story. So move to Hawaii, it sounds like is the moral of it. So I think, we're here, we're talking about how wonderful fiscal sponsorship is, the idea of sharing, especially the sharing economy that continues to be built in the US and is growing. But I think a lot of people don't know about fiscal sponsorship. And I'm curious, of our attendees, who's heard of it before or who was so curious, that's why they hopped on. I'm interested, Amanda, I know you do these presentations a lot, why do you think fiscal sponsorship isn't as well known, and how are you getting the word out?
I wouldn't say I do them a lot, but I do talk about fiscal sponsorship a lot. I like to nerd out on fiscal sponsorship. Like I wish I knew about fiscal sponsorship when I started my first organization. I'm a serial entrepreneur, like just love starting things. That's why this field is perfect for me. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's well known. It's not advertised. It's not like on the IRS website, like, hey, instead of filling out this application, think about fiscal sponsorship. But, and what's funny to me as well is like a lot of people in the nonprofit community didn't even realize that fiscal sponsorship is what they were engaging in. So it's even been around, people are doing it and don't even know what it's called. But yeah, I mean, I just try to talk to anybody that says, oh, I want to start a nonprofit. And I say, oh, have you thought about fiscal sponsorship? I also like to go into Facebook groups about nonprofits. And then somebody always posts like, hey, can I get help with X, Y, and Z? And I love to comment, have you thought about fiscal sponsorship? Check out the fiscal sponsorship directory, which is a great resource online to find potential sponsors. But yeah, I think there's just not, I think if the IRS had a button on their website, like said, apply here or search for a sponsor, I think that would be the best, way to spread the word.
And I do want to highlight, so the fiscal sponsor directory, is that what you said, Amanda?
Yeah, I believe it's fiscalsponsordirectory.org.
Perfect. Oh, what were you going to say, Jerome? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I guess to answer that question, I think like so many things, I mean, like most people, when they think about starting a business, they're not thinking about whether or not it's an LLC or a C Corp, or a sole proprietorship. So it's one of these, corporate entity structure questions that I just think like isn't like the attractive part about what drives people to want to start their own organizations. So it's not. I guess this conversation is making me realize that there's a lot of really important value in making it a lot more accessible, bringing it more to the forefront. But I think that in the same way that people that want to start an organization don't realize there's this tax thing called the 501c3, right? And I think there's a lot of general confusion around whether a nonprofit means that you do really great things or not. There's plenty of organizations that I think are kind of terrible that have a 501c3 status, right? The 501c3 status is a tax status. That means that just like according to the IRS, you've met certain stipulations that say that you can receive tax deductible donations, ostensibly because it's for public good, right? But whether or not that's actually the case is something else. Anyhow, that's a whole aside. But yeah, I think it really comes down to the fact that like this idea of what is your tax, how are you getting your tax exemption, right, as an organization? That's that's the question, and no one's really thinking about that when they think about starting an organization.
And, no, excuse me. And so one thing I also want to talk about is, the next step. So either a program is finished because all the amazing work is done and the community need is served, or maybe for some reason the organization needs to dissolve. Have either of you worked with organizations or projects that have had an end date, and what does that look like for a fiscally sponsored project?
I'll dive in with the very first program we ever sponsored. Here in Massachusetts, there was an amazing group that got together online, like 800 volunteers. They got online and started helping high-risk individuals secure a vaccination appointment when when they were rolling out vaccinations. It wasn't a great rollout here in Massachusetts. So these people all got together and they basically beat the system and started getting people appointments for vaccinations. They booked over 25,000 vaccinations. It was just an incredible thing to see happen. But once the state did fix the issues that was making it inequitable, that program was done. And so and now you can get vaccinations everywhere. So, that one we decided, okay, we close everything down, which has been a very long process, but I think, so that's one example. Like, it was time limited. It served its need. There was no additional need past that point. And you don't want to keep a project on your books forever if it's done. So you just gotta go through that wind down process. We also work with an organization over the past 2 years that was facing turnaround or termination. They just did not know if it was worth keeping their doors open. They had lost leadership. They had lost a lot of things that were important to them moving forward. So it was really a long, kind of drawn out process that was worth it, though, because they didn't end up getting everything together and keeping the doors open, and they kept going, and now they're even on a road to doing bigger, better things. But it can be hard. It can be hard, though, when a project ends, whether it's no longer needed or you just are like, this isn't going to work. This isn't what I thought it was. It can be hard because when you go into the nonprofit sector or nonprofit work, you're really passionate about it. And it can be really, really a hard thing sometimes to close it down. And sometimes it's just business.
Yeah, I guess I'll share, that's actually, I think, another good reason for fiscal sponsorship is, especially if your program is smaller in scale. So we traditionally have mostly very small projects, and a lot of them have been like solely volunteer initiatives. And when you have a solely volunteer initiative, what that means is, as one of our friends here, colleagues often says, life is gonna life. And so, we'll have projects that kind of go on pause while life is lifing, and then the person will come back, a year later and be like, okay, I'm picking this up again. But sometimes they just don't come back, and it's not, they're not able to sustain it anymore. So we definitely have had plenty of projects like that over the years, and I think that not having to formally dissolve an entity is really nice. Well, we can kind of like patch it up, or if you let us know, like, hey, I got to take this year sabbatical, then that's okay, and we can just like report that. Basically, it's not a big deal. So that definitely, we have plenty of what we'll call it compost from programs that we had to put in the compost pile.
I love the compost pile. I love life is gonna life. I am definitely gonna take that with me after today and say that.
And what about for organizations that are graduating, that have been with you and for whatever reason are deciding, okay, we want to be on our own? Now can you both talk about that process a little bit, what that looks like, and how you support it?
So we actually, I would say no one's really left yet. We've had like our ones that are already 501c3s, like the one I just mentioned that was deciding whether to stay open or not. theirs was more of a, so there's different, and we kind of didn't talk about this. Oh, I am so sorry. I did not turn on my do not disturb. I don't think we talked about so much that there's that there's 6 or 8 different models of fiscal sponsorship. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like Jerome said, we're extending our 501c3 designation and all the other resources that are available. But there are different types. So like our organization, we participate in Model A, direct sponsorship, where you become a program of ours. So they never actually, those have not left us yet. So we do have some that are thinking about, like, we might get our 501c3 one day, but it's kind of a smooth ride with a fiscal sponsor. So there's not a lot of incentive to leave unless you want to take over bookkeeping and compliance and all of those things that we're handling for you. And then there's different kinds of other fiscal sponsorship models we offer, and one being technical assistance, which is, I believe, Model F. And so if you're already a 501c3 and you don't need our 501c3 designation, we can still provide that back office support to you. I don't know. I mean, we're an incubator. You think there would be graduation, but I think maybe that one that went on its own, they graduated, but that's kind of been our experience. I'm interested in hearing Jerome's, like, how that might work.
Yeah, so we've had a couple programs that have graduated. So we had one amazing program called the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, and they were with us like a couple of years ago, I guess maybe 5, 6 years ago, for about 2 years. They came to us, they graduated to us actually from another fiscal sponsor. Actually, I know this is recorded, so I'm using real names and stuff, but basically they had another fiscal sponsor that was much smaller, and really not able to keep up with their needs. So in fact, I think it was, yeah. So I won't get into the details, but I think it was just not a good fit for them. And then, so they joined our boat for a little while, and then graduated, I think, like 2 years later to another entity, another fiscal sponsor called the NEO Foundation, which is a much larger, very well run, and really could connect them to some serious funding. And so that was great because, like we see our role is incubating. So we're supporting people without any sort of skin in the game in terms of keeping anyone, on our books necessarily. That's a really great example. We have a program right now, Emergent Works, that has just completely ballooned, is now a huge organization, and they really want to spin out into their own separate entity, and that's going to be happening in 2023. And so what's really neat about where we are right now is that we're actually a lot more involved this time in helping them to make that next step. And actually, Roz is personally helping out a lot with that project. So we're working together a lot on supporting the Emergent Works team as they take the next steps into their own entity. I did want to also share one very interesting kind of example, which is our pre-pro bono program. We actually spun it out as a separate entity because I'll also share in the early days, like that was what I thought was the best, would be like, oh, like they start with us and then they all become their own entities. So that's not always the case. It really depends on what's the scale and size and the structure of your organization. And so we have this fellowship, the pre-pro bono fellowship, which is a very small, well, for now it's small. It's a pretty small, very lean project where basically it's a pay it forward model where every summer we admit anywhere between like 5 and 15 of these pre-law students that are trying to get to law school to do law for good. And we basically help them with their LSAT. And it's really a really intensive summer of admissions consulting, introducing them to public interest lawyers, and, like really making connections that they may not have in their personal, community to law. And the thing about it is that basically the program has been running on basically $10K a year for over 10 years. And of that money, it really mainly goes to the directors who come back. It's a pay it forward model, as I mentioned. So each year, 2 of the fellows are tapped to come back and they teach the next summer's program. And then that's how it's been sustaining year over year. Now, as a separate entity from our umbrella, when it's its own standalone entity, we ran into some trouble because we weren't paying these students enough to be full-time like payroll, really, right? It's just not that much money. This is like a summer side gig. And yet they were doing all the substantive work of that organization. And so from the IRS perspective, they're not allowed to be a 1099. But at the same time, we can't really pay them a full salary. They're not full salaried employees. And so what ended up happening is once we realized that there was like actually a compliance problem there, we rolled P Pro Bono back into our umbrella, and it's now fiscally sponsored. Now, as it happens, they're hoping to raise a lot of money and change that up. But I think that's a good example. You know, if you're at a certain scale, it may not make sense for you to be a separate entity. That's kind of an interesting graduation and then coming back to school story.
And I think there are a lot of really good points in there. One, which is, you know, thinking about compliance. Like, compliance is very complicated. Not only do you have tax compliance, which is where the 501c3 status comes in, but you have HR compliance. You have legal compliance, you know, writing contracts, both for your vendors and even for yourself. You know, there's a lot of compliance pit holes you can fall into, and really having somebody else there to walk you through that and think through those is huge, you know, in and of itself. Like, you can say a lot of things about fiscal sponsorship, but having another person to work through compliance issues is, I think, invaluable.
Yeah, actually, maybe one last point there is, you know, kind of reflecting back on why people came to us and then why also people moved on elsewhere. I think that's a really good thing to think about when you're looking at fiscal sponsors. So, I mean, I think that we might be talking to Amanda about getting some help on some of what we need based on what she shared about the amazing program they have. And, you know, at the same time, you know, I know that we've had programs that came to us because their previous fiscal sponsors actually weren't prepared to do everything that was necessary as a fiscal sponsor. So I do want to add some forewarning also that not all fiscal sponsors, even if they advertise that, not all of them are very well organized themselves. So, you know, that's just something to be aware of.
Yeah, no, we definitely get programs that were with a previous sponsor. Some a good experience, they just can't give them the support they need as they grow. And sometimes it's a bad experience and they weren't able to meet their needs. So people, yeah, we definitely gotten programs from other fiscal sponsors as well. And I just shared in the chat a link to a resource that we use as an organization through Harbor Compliance. They have all the compliance needs for every state, for all 50 states. So we often consult that resource. And if you are curious on this recording now or later, go check that out. Oh, thank you. I think I just posted it to us privately, but check out that resource and you can find your state and you'll see there's a ton of compliance from establishing yourself as a corporation, registering to fundraise, getting your sales tax certificate, your sales tax exemption certificate, filing with the IRS. Yeah, there's a lot going on. And I think that's the other, even down to just sharing a sales tax exemption certificate or fundraising registration in a particular, you know, number of states. Yeah, I think that compliance alone is just worth the price tag of a fiscal sponsor.
And I do like the point that not all fiscal sponsors are created equal. And, you know, again, when you're looking at fiscal sponsors, ask them, you know, about these questions that have come up and, you know, what their compliance support looks like, and even talk to other programs, you know, that are fiscally sponsored by the same org, because you might get a good sense of the way that they're being supported, right? And not everybody wants the same type of support. So just thinking through what that looks like for you. I want to make sure that anybody that has questions, I keep looking on Facebook and there are no questions from the Facebook Live team, but is there anybody from our attendees that has a question for our panelists? Thank you, Lauren, for your earlier question.
I have a question if no one has a question.
Yes, let's go.
I'm always interested. I love meeting other fiscal sponsors because it's such a niche thing in the nonprofit sector. And I'm so curious about models and like your processes. So Jerome, with Prime Produce, what is your application process look like? Like, how do you decide to take on a program? Like, what's that look like for you guys?
Oh boy, all right. It's not modeled at all. So, I mean, basically what it is, you know, somebody asks, I generally personally take the meeting and I usually try to put up a lot of blockers to say like, hey, you probably don't want to fiscally sponsor with us. There's all these other fiscal sponsors. Have you done the research? And I usually will actually really ask them to come back to me if they want to have a second meeting to explore fiscal sponsorship with us, to talk about why they don't like the other fiscal sponsors that are out there. And for us, it's really because, as a small grassroots incubator where we have no paid staff centrally, it's really just an all volunteer team that runs it to support the programs. Like we're not trying to expand our programming very aggressively. We really just want to find people that really need us to serve them, either because they're part of our community or because, as I mentioned, basically that they're not a good fit elsewhere. Assuming that they, still want to proceed and explore fiscal sponsorship with us, basically just have a proposal process where they submit a written proposal about what their project is, and that goes to our board, and our board reviews it. Now, I'll say one kind of interesting, there's one kind of fun, interesting thing about our model, which is I mentioned that we have a lot of volunteer projects historically and current, and lives, and the projects just fizzle out. So one thing about our program is that it's structured to kind of evolve over time, but it started off that way because we just needed to know who is still doing something at the beginning of each year. So actually, our fiscal sponsorship contract is always for 1 year. And all of our programs renew every year, which actually has proven really helpful because as we've been starting to develop more infrastructure to support, just better compliance and, being more audit ready, we're needing to update what the requirements are and what we expect from all of our fiscal sponsorship leads. And so there's basically every year, as a way that we get information about all of our programs, and also as a way to make sure that we know who's still wanting to run the program the next year. We have this process now where they need to re-sign every single year to continue as one of our fiscally sponsored programs.
I like that. Yeah, we do. We started with that similar where they had to re-sign each year, but then we quickly went to just auto renewing. And we do try to meet with them annually though, just to check in, get feedback, see like what's working for you, what isn't, what's your plans for the year to come. Yeah.
To what extent do you have volunteer projects or basically programs that are very small that like don't receive any or like less than $1,000 like in a year? Do you have a lot of those?
We do. So we have a program that is essentially 2 women that are volunteering their time to serve the homeless population in their area. They do like a weekly breakfast. They provide transportation to showers in the area and laundry service. They've been with us for a little over a year now. They just had their 1-year anniversary. And in that first year, I think they raised $2,000 and then donated funds themselves. But we try to give them the same level of support though that we would give, one of our organizations that has a $500,000 grant that they came in the door with. We support them equally, in either way. And I think one of the focuses we're looking at now that they're entering their 2nd year, which I know that they're motivated to start increasing their own funding, is I want to see like, how can we help you guys, get to that next level? If you want to keep this going, where do you want to grow? How do you want to get there? So I think that's something we're trying to do as an organization, is help them increase their capacity and ability to be funded.
And that's a really interesting conversation. I know one that Jerome and I have often. How do we support growth and meet people where they're at? But I see one of our participants has a question, so I'm going to turn Crystal's mic on. Hopefully that works. Okay, Crystal, what's your question?
Hi, this was a very interesting conversation, and Rosalind, thank you for telling me to tune in today. So my question is, because this is all new to me, I found out about it today. So I have an organization that I'm a hairstylist. I created an organization in 2018 that is about empowering Black and Brown people through the use of beauty, mindfulness techniques, and healthy living. I want to expand it because I've been paying for everything out of my own pocket and getting like small grants here and there to put on the larger programming. And when I am applying, so when I'm ready to apply for fiscal sponsorship, what do I need to say? Like, I mean, I'm saying that, I know that's like a, a strange question, but like, how do I present that? Considering I'm just a girl with a passion that wants to expand what she's doing already.
I love that. I know. I get all excited. I get so excited when people have these great ideas. I love what you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing about it. So our organization, we try to create a very low barrier to our services. So we have an application online and we pretty much guide you through what to say. So versus like Jerome, you guys ask for a proposal. If you have one, great, we'll accept it. But we do have everyone fill out the application because either you have the information or this is things you haven't thought about yet, and it might help inspire things you do want to be thinking about as you consider going under fiscal sponsorship. So yeah, I mean, just saying what you said, to be honest, and then filling out that application or putting it down on paper, depending on the you're applying through.
Okay. So what about like, so when I've looked at other nonprofits and tried to like, copy what they're doing, they have a mission statement, a vision. They have like one website I saw, they had like their impact and how many people they've helped. I don't have those kinds of things. So like, what, I mean, I know I've helped people, but like, I don't know how many. So I'm just saying like, for me to be at the very beginning, even though I have like, events that I've done in the past or work that I've done in the past, but in terms of like, I guess elevating what I'm doing, I don't have those kinds of things,
Yeah.
So like, that's why I'm asking, like, what do I say to sound a little more, I guess, advanced in this and not sound like it's just an idea that, just popped into my head.
Well, I definitely don't want to dominate the conversation, but I am eager to say, that's where it starts. Like you have a theory of change. You have an idea of something that can positively impact a community that's maybe underserved or doesn't, have access to these things that you want to provide. So measuring your impact is such an important step in growing your organization and determining how you're going to measure that impact. So again, it depends on your sponsor. They might want you further down the road where you already have those tools in place that you've already been measuring your impact and your community served and then breakdown of demographics, et cetera, et cetera. Or if you have an organization like either one of ours that is willing to meet you where you are, we're going to help you develop that. So you can get those things in place, and we call it getting grant ready. Once you have all those tools in place, we're going to, like, your sponsor should help you get there is
okay.
What I'm trying to say.
So it isn't beyond, like this wouldn't be a bad time to be applying for fiscal sponsorship is what I'm saying.
No.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. Go ahead, Jerome. I've been talking a lot.
No, thanks. And so, one thing is if you have been running programming, just you've been funding it out of your own pocket, that's okay. Like that counts for something. We have a lot of programs that came to us and joined us as one of our fiscally sponsored programs after they've been, run for a year or two out of just, out of someone's pocket. Now, of course, that's not great because they can't receive tax deductible donations, which is why they wanted to get more structured and get more formal. But that all counts. That's okay. And, like, as long as you're truthful, you can say like, hey, this is what we've been doing. The founder started doing this and, this year and has hosted this many events. And now we're trying to make it official. We're trying to make make it into a, official organization. So I think that, whatever you've done, kudos to you, and that's meaningful. And to the extent that you can, capture that information somehow, I think that's really great. And hypothetically, if you don't have a lot of programming, but you have a lot of expertise that you're trying to bring to the table, I think that's great too. You can lean into that. And, when you present what your project is, that's valuable to know that like, hey, I'm a professional with this many years of experience, and this is what I'm aiming to do. I think also like setting a strong vision, as Amanda mentioned, the theory of change or important objectives that you're trying to hit, that is, I think, really captivating. And if you're saying like, hey, I want to do this for this many people by 2024, great. That can be what your campaign really is all about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. So I'm going to shift over to Lauren and allow you to talk. And so you can come off mute and ask your question.
Hey, how you guys doing? Yeah, thank you so much for this webinar. It's great. One of my friends that was working with some nonprofits pointed me in this direction, so that's how I ended up here. I have probably about 100 questions, so I'm trying to figure out how to condense it down to a few. But yeah, kind of to I guess I'm not entirely sure what kind of support fiscal sponsors give. I guess that depends. Those were kind of the preface of my first two questions. And how involved will they get on like the business side, or will they? And is that based on how much percentage they'll be taking from the project? So just to give you a background, so I have multiple projects. I have a for-profit business, but I have multiple projects that are nonprofit based. So this current one's a poetry, art, and photography book for the homeless. And so that's I've been working with homeless communities since 2012. So I wanted to, I'm an artist myself, a writer and musician, and I wanted to put a creative project together. So it's a nonprofit based. And so I didn't know what direction to take, I guess, on this, and what kind of support would a fiscal sponsor provide in this kind of project. I have multiple arts projects. Another one's an ekphrastic poetry that I feature artists and share their work on a blog. So I was thinking of trying to, at least for what I gathered from this webinar, is maybe I should find an arts nonprofit that would kind of umbrella all these creative projects. And I would love for them to be more heavily involved on the business side of things. And now I don't know if that's something that is solely on the responsibility of the person, the sponsee, or if fiscal sponsors actually do that kind of thing. Will they collaborate with you on your business plan, or is that something that they're already looking for completed?
That's a really great question, Lauren. I'll just jump in real quick to just share also, I think maybe didn't explicitly say this, but like the level of involvement from fiscal sponsors, it could vary a lot. So just to kind of put a flag in the ground, I don't know how up to date this information is, actually, I just realized, but I'm just going to say, so have you ever heard of Fractured Atlas?
Actually, I had that pulled up on my computer. That was where my friend, the website he sent me to.
Great. So they're actually a really good example of one type of fiscal sponsor, which is, and this may have changed, which is why I just want to speak carefully, but earlier years ago, like they were pretty hands off, like their application process is like pretty straightforward. You can do it virtually, and I'd say that they offer artists, which is their focus, like a way to receive donations and to support the arts, right? In a way that is very straightforward and accessible, but not very hands-on, right? And like, I've heard someone once refer to them as basically a payment processor, right? Which is like, hey, that's great though. Like if that's all you need, amazing. And they're there and they're really providing a valuable service. But like that's one end of the spectrum, which is a program that someone might mistake as just a payment processor versus, on the very other end of the spectrum, you've got projects like Amanda, where they're really going to bat for you and like really getting involved in a really intentional way to support your program's growth.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's what I'd be looking for if that does exist, and almost like a team to join with and yeah, I kind of like the nonprofit structure. I don't need to, maintain control of this project. I'd love other people to get involved and really collaborate on how to actually implement some of the ideas on moving forward with it. And okay, so that I guess that answers that. So would you recommend Fractured Atlas as a sponsor? I guess based on.
So I would definitely recommend looking at Fractured Atlas, 100%. I think, we could maybe talk more about what the specifics are of your programs to see what makes sense. I mean, one thing that you shared that is, I think, maybe important is that you actually have multiple programs, so I think that might be an interesting point to consider, which is like, what kind of fiscal sponsorship solution works for you? And I'll stop taking up space here and let anyone.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, gosh, I wish I could remember the name of this organization that's out in California. And they sponsor multiple artistic projects. It's getting late here on the East Coast. My tongue's starting to tie. But yeah, I think it's like Jerome said, it just depends on the level. Like you said, you want other people to get involved, and you kind of sound like you want a community to collaborate with. You know, so like an organization like ours wouldn't be a great fit. But I did just put into the chat, and Roz, I'm sorry, I almost sent it just to us again, but I wanted to include another resource for Lauren, the fiscal sponsors. Oh wait, did I put the same one in there? Oh, it was the same one. I'm trying to post the link. Oh, wait, maybe that is the right one. Okay, so I shared another directory that could be very helpful. It's through the National Network of Fiscal Sponsors, and you can actually sort it by your area. So you could put like music or art in there, and it'll pull up some great potential sponsors for you.
Oh, nice. Great. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll take a look at that. Yeah, but thank you. Thank you very much, you guys. This has been great.
Thank you. And we are right at 7. And, you know, I also have a little one that is probably going crazy. So I want to thank Jerome and Amanda so much for this conversation. This was super interesting. Even as someone that works with fiscal sponsors, I found it incredibly interesting and engaging. So I hope you both enjoyed it, and I hope everyone that participated enjoyed it as well.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It's been great. It was nice to meet you, Jerome.
Yeah, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, yeah. And